Chapter 17 is a beast, and instead of splitting it into 2 days, we're just going to go over it all today. I'm going to go fairly quickly, but I will post the video if you guys miss anything and you want to go back. All right, so we went from protists, which are really little, you need a microscope to see them, to plants and how plants got to be on land, and now we are going over animals and what distinguishes some animals from other animals. So how did animals evolve? Animal life began in Precambrian seas with the evolution of multicellular creatures that ate other organisms. This happened about 750 million years ago. 542 million years ago, animals underwent a rapid diversification called the Cambrian explosion. Basic fossil forms for all of the animals are found from this period. So the Cambrian is a period in time. Precambrian life came before the Cambrian period. Then a bunch of different animals evolved right during the Cambrian period, and they called it the Cambrian explosion or the Cambrian radiation. But that's where the name Cambrian came from. So scientists hypothesize that animals evolved from a colonial flagellated protist. And we're not going to watch any of the videos because there are like 83 slides to get through. So if you guys want to watch the videos, you're going to have to go back and watch them on your own. So what is an animal? And animals are eukaryotic. So they're made of eukaryotic cells with nucleus, mitochondria. Some of them have chloroplasts, Golgi apparatus, all that good stuff. They're multicellular. All animals are multicellular. There are no single-celled animals. They're heterotrophic, meaning they have to eat to get food. And they're able to digest their food within their bodies. Animal phylogeny. To reconstruct the evolutionary history of animals, biologists use comparative anatomy and embryology. When we talked about evolution, we talked about different lines of evidence that scientists use to study evolution, and embryology and comparative anatomy were two of them. So very, very, very early primitive animals do not have any actual tissues. Tissues evolved later, so tissues versus no tissues. Body symmetry, radial versus bilateral. We are bilateral animals. You can only cut us in half one way to equal our parts. Body cavity type, and then invertebrate versus vertebrate. Backbones versus no backbones. Biologists categorize animals by their body plan, which are general features of a body structure, and more recently, genetic data. Like we always talk about, 1950s is when the structure of DNA was discovered by various scientists. Before that, scientists could only look at these animals and say, oh, these two look alike. I think they're related. One major branch point distinguishes sponges from all other animals because unlike more complex animals, sponges lack true tissues. So there's the first branch, tissues versus no tissues. Sponges versus all the other animals on the planet. So this is a general tree. Ancestral protist gave rise to all of the phylums that you see here of animals. Sponges is the first one that evolved from the ancestral protists and didn't have true tissues. So those are the first ones we'll talk about. But we will go through all the other phylums too. So the second major evolutionary split is based on body symmetry. Like I said, radial symmetry refers to animals that are identical all around a central axis. And then bilateral symmetry, like us, where there's only one way to split the animal into equal halves, left and right. And these are examples. So you have a sea anemone, you can split it anyway and it will go in half. And then you have a lobster for bilateral symmetry. There's only one way to split that in half. Animals also vary according to the presence of a type of body cavity. A cavity is like an opening inside of us. The fluid-filled space separating the digestive tract from the outer body wall. We have one big long tube for our digestive tract, and it's separated from the rest of us inside. If the body cavity is not completely lined by tissue derived from mesoderm, it's called a pseudocoelom. Prefix pseudo means fake or false. And then a true coelom is completely lined by tissue derived from mesoderm. So the official science name of a body cavity is a coelom, C-O-E-L-O-M. Some animals have that body cavity. They're called coelomates. Some animals do not. Some animals have an in-between. So an acoelomate is an animal that does not have a body cavity. If you put an A in front of anything, it means not. So no body cavity. A pseudocoelomate, like I said, is pseudo is fake. So it's kind of a fake body cavity. And then a coelomate, where you have a full body cavity. Their cavity is derived from mesoderm. Taxonomy, if you remember, we have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So all animals belong to the domain Eukarya because we are all eukaryotes with eukaryotic cells. We all also belong to the kingdom Animalia. We are all animals. Okay, so once we differ by phylum. So as we talk about different animals, we're going to talk about them according to their phylum. So our major animal groups are invertebrates versus vertebrates. Invertebrates don't have a backbone. They represent 95% of the animal kingdom, and they have many different phyla. That's supposed to say many different phyla. Phyla is the plural of phylum. Like bacteria is the plural of bacterium. And then vertebrates are animals with a backbone. And all vertebrates belong to the phylum Chordata. So we'll go over all the invertebrates first, and then we will go over the vertebrates. Porifera are the sponges. They're stationary animals. They lack true tissues. They evolved very early from colonial protists. These were the first to evolve from the early colonial protists. Sponges resemble a sac with one opening, and feeding pores draw in water and food. They can take many forms, though. They all live underwater, and they are very often mistaken for coral, but these are not coral. These are sponges. People dry them out and use them to clean things. So up close, that's what a sponge looks like. And then in their cells, what you can't see if you look at it under a microscope are little feeding pores. And they're kind of open for water to flow in and out, and they just kind of catch the food. Phylum Cnidaria. The C is silent. Cnidaria. Cnidarians are characterized by the presence of body tissues. So these were the first to evolve after sponges. They're a little bit more complex in that they have the true body tissues. They have radial symmetry. You can split them anyway in half. And they have tentacles with stinging cells, and they include hydras, sea anemones, and corals. And a hydra is another name for something you are very familiar with, or you should be. The basic body plan of a cnidarian is a sac with a gastrovascular cavity, which is a central digestive compartment with only one opening. So food and waste go in and out the same opening. But there are two variations, the stationary polyp, like a sea anemone, and the floating medusa, which is your jellyfish. The body plans are polyps and medusa, and then there's various examples of each. So that's a sea anemone if you've never seen one. If you've ever been to the beach, you can find sea anemones all along the rocks, and if you touch them, they close up. And then the medusa form is the jellyfish. There's the cavity in the middle, and the one opening the mouth and the anus for the waste and the food to go in and out. And then tentacles. Everybody knows jellyfish have tentacles a lot of the time. They'll sting you. Cnidarian are carnivores. They use tentacles armed with cnidocytes, which are their stinging cells, for defense and to capture prey. And somebody actually caught that under a microscope once, and the little stinging cells sticking out really quick to immobilize their prey before they eat it.
Hey, it's me, Destin, and welcome back.
The next phylum is called Mollusca. These are the mollusks. They're represented by soft-bodied animals that are usually protected by a hard shell. If you think of any animals with a shell, they are probably a mollusk. Many mollusks feed by using a file-like organ called a radula to scrape up food. So it kind of looks like a little mouth, but we call it a radula. The body has three main parts: the muscular foot that they use to move around, just like our feet, a visceral mass containing most of the internal organs, and a mantle, a fold of tissue that secretes the shell if the shell is present. Most mollusks have a shell. There are some that do not. And these notes are going to come in very handy for your lab this week. There's a lot of information in these notes that will also be in the lab. So major groups or classes. So the phylum is Mollusca. The classes are either gastropods, snails, or sea slugs. They're both gastropods. One of them has a shell, one does not. Bivalves are another class. Those are your clams and scallops and mussels. And then cephalopods have a large brain and tentacles: octopus, nautilus, squids. Those are cephalopods. Those are all different classes of mollusks. Worms. The next level up is worms. There's three types of worms in the animal kingdom, and the body cavity or coelom changes as they become more complex. Flatworms have no body cavity. That's why they're flat. And they're called acoelomates. Like I said, if you put an A in front of a word, it means no or not, so no body cavity. Roundworms are a pseudocoelomate. They have that fake body cavity. And segmented worms have a true coelom or true body cavity. So they are called coelomates. You're going to see this word coelom, coelomate a lot in your lab. Make sure you know what it means. So phylum Platyhelminthes are your flatworms. These are the simplest bilateral animals. They include forms that can be parasites or free-living if they're in the water. A lot of the time they look like they have little eyes. They're just eye spots, but don't use them to see. But you can tell they are flat. They do not have a body cavity. The gastrovascular cavity of flatworms is highly branched to provide an extensive surface area for absorption of nutrients. And they still have a gut with one opening for its mouth and anus. Food and waste go in and out the same opening. But it's characterized, number one, by being flat. And number two, if you look at it under a microscope, you can see those branches. They look like tree branches, but that is their gastrovascular cavity. Phylum Nematoda, roundworms or nematodes. They're cylindrical in shape. Cylindrical is just another name for round. They're tapered at both ends. They come to little points. They have a gut with two openings. So this is where the two opening digestive system evolved. They are pseudocoelomates. They have that in-between fake body cavity. They are the most numerous and widespread of all animals. They're important decomposers, but they are dangerous parasites in plants, humans, and other animals. If you have cats or dogs and they've ever had worms, these are the kind of worms that cause sickness in animals most of the time. So a free-living roundworm, you can see it's circle in shape, but it's tapered at the end. Parasitic roundworms in pork. This is why you always want to cook pork very, very well, because raw pork can make you sick. And then the head of a hookworm. That hookworm clamps onto something and doesn't let go unless forced to. Phylum Annelida. These are segmented worms because their bodies are segmented. A segment is just a subdivision of the body along its length into a series of repeated parts. You can see in the little cartoon the series of repeated parts. Those are segments. These are the only worms, the annelids, that have those segments. The body plan is a coelom. It has that full, true body cavity. It has a complete digestive tract with two openings, a mouth and an anus, and one-way movement of food. Food goes in one way, waste goes out the other. And these are the simplest animals with that complete digestive tract. This is also what our digestive tract is like, but we're going from simple to more complex. So major groups, you have the earthworms. And that's probably when you think of worm, earthworms are what you think of out in the garden. Polychaetes, like a Christmas tree worm, those are aquatic. And leeches. Leeches are the little animals that'll, if you swim in a lake and they'll stick to your skin and suck your blood. Those are annelids. The next level up is arthropods, phylum Arthropoda. They're bilateral with a true coelom. They have segments, but now on their segments, they've evolved appendages, arms, legs, limbs, wings. They have a hard skeleton called an exoskeleton made of chitin. If you remember chitin, it's the same substance that make up the cell walls of fungus. And arthropods are so widespread that we are also going to talk about four major classes of arthropods. So we have the domain, Eukarya, the kingdom is Animalia, the phylum is Arthropoda. For arthropods, we are now going to talk about four different major classes. So we have the arachnids, the crustaceans, the millipedes and centipedes, and the insects. Arachnids usually live on land. They usually have 4 pairs of walking legs and a specialized pair of feeding appendages, and include spiders, scorpions, ticks, and mites. You might have heard of the word arachnophobia. That is the fear of spiders, but arachnids include all of these. I don't like spiders. Not a lot of people do. Crustaceans are nearly all aquatic. They have multiple pairs of specialized appendages and include crabs, lobsters, crawfish, shrimp, and barnacles. Crustaceans are the things that we eat out of the sea, besides fish. Millipedes and centipedes have similar segments over most of their body. If you've ever wondered the difference, millipedes eat decaying matter, so they're decomposers, and they have 2 pairs of short legs per body segment, so they have more legs. They look like they have a million. Centipedes are terrestrial carnivores with poisoned claws, and they only have 1 pair of short legs per body segment. So they look like they have less legs. They only have 100 instead of a million. There's an example. The millipede has the 2 pairs of legs per segment. Centipede only has 1. Insects typically have a 3-part body consisting of a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And then they have various appendages sticking out of those 3 main parts. The insect head usually bears a pair of sensory antennae and a pair of eyes. It also has mouth parts that are adapted for particular kinds of eating, whether they're carnivores and they eat other insects, or they're herbivores and they eat plants. And then it has the wings, the arms, the legs. Flight is one key to the great success of insects. A lot of insects fly, so they survive very well. And then here's various insects: beetles, stink bugs, butterflies, katydids, praying mantis. These are all different types of insects. They have the same general body plan: head, thorax, abdomen, and then various things that come off of those. Many insects go a metamorphosis in their development. The typical one that you think of is the caterpillar to the butterfly. Elementary school kids study those, so you should have studied that a little bit in elementary school. Young insects may appear to be smaller forms of the adult or change from a larval form like the caterpillar into the adult, which is the butterfly. The next phylum is called Echinodermata. So we're out of the arthropods now, and its 4 main classes. Back to phylums and the echinoderms. They do not have body segments. They typically show radial symmetry as adults, but bilateral symmetry as larvae. And these are the first animals to have an endoskeleton. Endo means inside. Our skeleton is inside of us, so we have an endoskeleton. These are the simplest animals to evolve an endoskeleton. They also have a water vascular system that facilitates movement and gas exchange. Always got to exchange that oxygen for something. Sea stars, starfish are the typical echinoderm example. But sea urchins, which sometimes look like sea anemones, but they're in 2 different phylums. Sand dollars, sea cucumbers, these are all echinoderms, part of phylum Echinodermata. All right, so those are all the invertebrates. Now we are going to move on to the vertebrates for the most part. We're going to talk about a couple more invertebrates, but vertebrates have unique endoskeletons composed of a cranium, which is our science word for skull, and a backbone made of a series of bones called vertebrae. There's a picture of whale vertebrae there on the bottom. They are really big. So that is the skeleton of a snake, a cranium that protects the brain, and then segmented vertebrae all the way down. Our vertebrae don't go all the way down. Well, they go all the way down our bodies, but. So the phylum is chordata. Just like all the rest of our science words, we don't say CH, we use the K sound. So chordates have 4 main traits in common, 4 structures present at some stage in their development. They have pharyngeal pouches or gill slits. Even us, we have gills when we are embryos. A nerve cord and a notochord that eventually become our spinal cord and our vertebrae. And a post-anal tail. We still have a tail. It's the very, very end of our vertebral column. But we don't show the tail once we're adults. Characteristics of chordates. Body segmentation. The backbone of vertebrates, like I said, are segmented. And the muscles. All of our muscles are segmented. If that big pink blob at the top, if you look at your muscle cells under a microscope, that's what they look like. I mean, you can clearly see the stripes or segments in our muscle cells. Chordates also show bilateral symmetry. They have a true coelom, and they have a complete gut. One opening separated off from the rest of our bodies. One opening in, one opening out. Chordates consist of 3 groups of invertebrates, actually. Lancelets are blade-like animals without a cranium, but they have other things. Tunicates or sea squirts also lack a cranium, and hagfishes are eel-like forms that have a cranium. And all other chordates are vertebrates. They all have the full cranium and vertebrae backbone. Here's examples of what those look like: lancelet, tunicates, hagfish. An overview of chordate and vertebrate evolution. So the ancestral chordate that evolved. This is a completely different branch, still on the same tree, but completely different branch. So all of those are called chordates. Most of them are vertebrates. Then limbs evolved. Now there's tetrapods and then amniotes. We will get to amniotes when we talk about reproduction in a minute. So fishes, the first vertebrates were aquatic and most likely evolved during the early Cambrian period, about 542 million years ago. And the types of fishes that are still seen today are jawless fishes, cartilaginous fishes, and bony fishes. So fish are more than 500 million years old. They've been here since almost the beginning of life. Jawless fish are exactly what they sound like. They don't have jaws. They just have an opening for their mouth. So hagfish and lampreys. Hagfish have a cranium, but no vertebrae. Lampreys actually also have a vertebrae. Cartilaginous fish means they are made of cartilage. Their class is called chondrichthyes, or they're called chondrichthyans. And these are the sharks and the rays. So they don't have a typical skeleton like us. They have cartilage as their skeleton. Cartilage is what our ears are made of. It's kind of flexible. They also have a lateral line sensory system, which actually senses other sharks and rays so they can swim around in a school as one unit. And they must keep moving to breathe and stay afloat. So they don't actually technically sleep like us. They have to keep swimming. Water has to keep going through their gills or they'll actually drown, which is a weird thing to think about, but they have to keep swimming to be able to breathe. Bony fishes. They are class osteichthyes. They're osteichthyans. Osteo means bone. If you have osteoporosis, you have weak bones. These are all the other fishes besides the sharks and rays. Perch, bass, tuna, eels. They have a carbon reinforced bony skeleton, just like us. They have an operculum flap that ventilates the gills and a swim bladder that keeps them afloat. If you've ever seen a fish breathe, their mouth goes in and out, but their gills also kind of move. The flap over it is called the operculum, and it protects their gills because the gills are actually really sensitive. Fish amphibians in the transition to land. Lobe-finned bony fishes, such as the lungfish, began the transition to land. This is, we're only talking about it shortly here, but this is what your Ed puzzle is on this week. Their fins eventually reformed and the bones became different arm bones or finger bones. So lobe-finned fish, they used to be finned. They got reconstructed into limbs. So fish can crawl out of the ocean and live on land. The muscular lobe fins became 4 legs. Tetrapods are animals with 4 legs or 4 limbs. And that eventually gave rise to the amphibians. Amphibians were the first group of animals that could live outside of water, that evolved to live outside of the water. Tetrapods, terrestrial vertebrates, are collectively called tetrapods, which mean 4 feet. Tetra is 4, pod is feet. They include amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. Amphibians include salamanders, frogs, and others. They live on land, but they still need water to reproduce. They breathe through their skin. They don't have lungs like us or separate breathing organs. They typically undergo a metamorphosis from aquatic larva to tadpole to terrestrial adult. The frog life cycle is also something that I think you learned in elementary school. The eggs hatch, they become a tadpole, and eventually they become an adult frog. And there are frogs. It's called a glass frog in the picture where you can actually see through their skin. You can see all of their organs. That's a real thing. So tadpoles look more fish-like, but as they grow out of that larval stage, they will look like frogs, toads, salamanders. Reptiles are next. These include snakes, lizards, turtles, crocodiles, and alligators. They are ectotherms that obtain heat from their environment. We maintain our own heat in our bodies, which is why our temperature is always around 98.6. Reptiles do not. They have to get heat from their environments. And they can live in drier areas because they have scales. Their scales will prevent water loss. and keep that water inside of them. They also evolved eggs, a hard-shelled amniotic egg, where you can keep all the moisture inside that will protect the growing embryo, the growing baby. It doesn't require outside water. That liquid is already inside to nourish the embryo. Reptiles diversified extensively during the Mesozoic era. Dinosaurs were the most diverse group of reptiles and the largest animals ever to live on land. Birds are the next class that evolved, or the next phylum that evolved. No, class. Sorry, they're all phylum Chordata. Recent genetic and fossil evidence show that during the great reptilian radiation of the Mesozoic era, birds evolved from a lineage of small two-legged dinosaurs called theropods. So modern birds are the ancestors of a certain type of dinosaur. Birds have many adaptations that make them lighter in flight. Their bones are honeycombed, so that makes them very, very light. They don't have the density and the weight that would pull them down. They don't have all the same internal organs that we do or other animals do. And unlike other reptiles, birds are endotherms, maintaining a warmer and steady body temperature at all times, just like us. This ensures a steady metabolism to provide energy throughout life's activities. Flight is an activity that requires a great deal of energy. So the fact that they can maintain their inner body temperature with their inner metabolism provides the energy for flight. The first mammals are about 200 million years ago, arose about 200 million years ago, and they were probably small nocturnal insect eaters. Most mammals are terrestrial, although dolphins, porpoises, and whales are mammals that are totally aquatic. And mammals have two unique characteristics. They have hair. Sometimes the hair is very thick and it's called fur. But they also have mammary glands that produce milk, which nourishes their young. No other animal class has that. There's three major groups of mammals distinguished by their method of reproduction: monotremes, marsupials, and eutherians. Monotremes are the oldest type of mammal. These include the anteater and the platypus. And their method of reproduction is they lay eggs. There are mammals that lay eggs. This sets them apart and makes them very unique. Marsupials include kangaroos, possums, koalas. They are native to Australia, and that is, besides zoos, you will only find them in Australia. The embryo begins development in the womb, but the fetus is born early. And it kind of migrates to this pouch, and the pouch has a mammary gland for their milk, and that's where they will finish developing. before the parent pushes them out into the wild. They are very unique animals, marsupials are. All the rest are called eutherians, including us. They're most mammals outside of Australia. All of embryonic development happens internally with a placenta. So we use the term placental mammals more than we use eutherians. But inside the uterus, there's basically a cord that attaches the mother's uterus to the embryo, to the growing fetus, and that's called the placenta. That's the umbilical cord. And everything from elephants to dolphins reproduce this way. The human ancestry. Primates evolved from insect-eating mammals during the late Cretaceous period, about 65 million years ago. Humans are primates, which is the mammalian group that also includes lorises, lemurs, tarsiers, monkeys, and apes. And that is our branch of the evolutionary tree. There are many other branches, but if you showed all of the branches at the same time, you couldn't distinguish any of them from the others. Primates are distinguished by characteristics that were shaped by the demands of living in trees. These characteristics include limber shoulder joints, eyes in front of the face, excellent hand-eye coordination, and extensive parental care. Primates are the first animals that didn't just push their babies out and leave them off to the wild. We actually took care of them to a certain point. Taxonomists divide the primates into three main groups. The first group of primates include lorises, patos, and lemurs. You guys should all know where lemurs live. I bet you've all seen the movie. And then tarsiers form the second group. The third group, what's called anthropoids, includes monkeys, apes, and humans. Humans and chimpanzees have shared a common African ancestry for all but the last 5 to 7 million years. Paleoanthropology is the study of human evolution. And I actually meant to do an extra ed puzzle this week for extra credit. I will post that today about human evolution. DNA between humans and chimpanzees is 98% similar, but the 2% that is different. One of them facilitates the formation of words by the mouth, which enabled human speech. AME1 facilitates the digestion of starch. ASPM controls brain size. Our brains are bigger. The bigger our brains are, the smarter we are. LCT permits the digestion of milk sugar into adulthood. Most other mammals don't drink milk beyond childhood, beyond infancy, actually. And HAR2 drives the gene activity in the wrist and thumb during development. The wrist and thumb gives us our opposable thumbs. Helps us use tools, among other things. Different human features evolved at different rates. At separate times during human evolution, upright posture and an enlarged brain evolved. Upright posture and walking on 2 feet is called bipedalism. Bipedalism gave humans an advantage when hunting and using tools. We no longer had to use our hands to walk. We could use our hands to use those tools and hunt and bows and arrows, fishing rods. Before there was the genus Homo, we are Homo sapiens. Several hominin species of the genus Australopithecus walked the African savanna. So scientists are certain that bipedalism is an actual very old trait. It didn't just evolve with humans or the Homo sapiens. It evolved millions of years ago with our ancestors. Homo habilis is another one of our ancestors. It means handyman. He had a larger brain, intermediate size between Australopithecus and modern humans. He also continued the tradition of walking upright on 2 legs. And he was the first to make tools. This is why they named him the handyman. And tools enhanced hunting, gathering, and scavenging on the African savanna. Homo erectus was the next level of ancestor. He was the first species to extend humanity's range from Africa to other continents. This global dispersal began about 1.8 million years ago. He was taller than Homo habilis and he had a larger brain. So he walked a little taller. It was an advantage to be tall. Maybe food was up in the trees. And this brain got just a little bit bigger. Homo erectus gave rise to regionally diverse descendants in Europe and Asia, and Homo neanderthalensis, who we call Neanderthals. Neanderthals and modern humans shared a common ancestor about 500,000 years ago, and may have even interbred with some Homo sapiens. The oldest known fossils of our own species were discovered in Ethiopia and date from 160 to 195,000 years ago. So we are very, very young compared to the rest of the species on this planet. DNA studies strongly suggest that all living humans can trace their ancestry back to a single African Homo sapiens lineage that began 160 to 200,000 years ago. All right, that is chapter 17. I know it was long. So this week you got the practice questions. You have an ed puzzle, when fish first breathed air. When fish first breathed air. I'm going to put up an extra credit ed puzzle. About human evolution. You have lab 22 on animals. And you have lecture exam 7, which is on 3 chapters, 15, 16, and 17. All right. Any questions?